Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Well, we're back for another Things Hidden podcast. I'm David Gornoski, here with the writer and editor at aneighborschoice.com, Surit Dasgupta. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Excited for another conversation with you.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I wanted to do is revisit some of the themes that we've kind of established in previous conversations and kind of bring them all together. And I kind of want to frame this discussion with you as how the truth sets people free. And I want to start off with this concept kind of to help you see, because we've talked about it in different ways, but because it's kind of a new concept for a lot of people, it's something worth trying to go over again in different ways and add to it and use different metaphors. So I thought a metaphor that would be appropriate for understanding how truth operates in the gospel from an anthropological perspective, meaning when we say that this is a study of how human behavior is, how human nature is, how human society forms, that the Bible reveals as a kind of guidebook to human anthropology. And it's this notion of clinging versus consuming. And there's we talked about it before, about there's a passage in John, I believe, where Jesus, he resurrects, and Mary and the women are coming to anoint his body and put oils. And of course, he's not in the tomb, right? And he's resurrected. And it describes other women as like bowing down and worship. And Mary, says Rabbi, right? And he says something to the effect of, and we can pull up the passage in this conversation, but do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. Like he's got to do stuff, right? So I thought, I know there's different interpretations theologically about what's going on there, but just from an anthropological perspective, I think it helps to kind of juxtapose do not cling to me to other passages like in John that talk about, eat my body, drink my blood, right? So this idea of clinging to Jesus versus consuming Jesus, I think this is important. If we're thinking of the Bible as a inspired text like it is, that a creator comes into and inspires this text to reveal to his creatures who they are, what they're about, how they operate, how to flourish as a created being, and how to flourish by imitating his spirit without getting into despairs and distractions and alienations like we do, then I think this would be appropriate for communicating to your creatures. Don't cling to me like every idol you've constructed. Don't lean on me be me. So if you want to communicate to creatures universally, to not hold when Jesus comes as the pure sign, the pure image of God for humans to relate to, how can he communicate as word, right? He's the word. He's the divine truth of God, the creator of everything and the creator of us, made in his image. How can he communicate to us that he does not want us to do the same thing we've done to every God that we've created and try to do that to him? In other words, if you want people to do it and to become like you, you've got to use very visceral analogies and very visceral imagery to get the point across in their hearts. And I can't think of a better juxtaposition than Jesus revealing what humans are since the foundations of their society, and also revealing who God is since the beginning of time and before it. How do you do that but use a metaphor like, don't cling to me in one passage and then eat my body, drink my blood, and if you want to be eternal, have eternal life like me? There's nothing more viscerally, I can't think of a more visceral juxtaposition than that. What I'm saying is that many folks have an objectification of Christ rather than making him the subject of their life. They see him as an object to attain to get to a certain status in their life, but they don't see him as the subject of their life, that you're to become Christ, you're to be Christ, you're to be one with him, you're to abide in him as he abides in the Father. Like you, that's the whole point of everything he's telling. Get out of the boat, walk on water. Don't stay in the boat and say, oh, you're so wonderful. Oh, you're so powerful. You're Hercules, you're Thor, you're Marduk, you're Zeus, you're beyond anything I could ever be. I just need to bow to you and tell you how awesome you are, and you will give me grace and favor. That's not what Jesus has in mind. Because he never, even when people are bowing to him, he's like, no, why are you bowing to me? Worship only the Father. That the point of his role in the Trinitarian economy in the Gospels and in the rest of the story is to point people to becoming one with God by being and doing what he does, by imitating him rather than thinking of him as an abstract concept. And I think this is important because many people have mentioned, and I don't want to get into the personalities because that'll get people distracted, but, folks like Jordan Peterson who talk about Jesus from a psychological avatar, a psychological archetype that folks are to kind of, psychologically ground their actions in a mental kind of way in the dream world. But I think that doesn't do it service, because if you don't realize how much we are to be him literally, not use him as a metaphor to justify a war, not use him as a metaphor to justify becoming our true self, but literally looking at the way he dealt with his neighbors nonviolently, social aikido, all these different things that we talk about that Jesus does, and literally trying to be and do those things and think that way in your life, and not hold him up as this object that we're going to put caution tape around and say, don't you dare try to be like Jesus. The moment you say you're trying to be like Jesus is the moment you look arrogant and hubristic and a cult leader or messianic. You've got messianic delusions, right? Don't you try to be like Jesus. You just sit down and shut up and worship from afar and, do the rituals that your church tells you to do, or your tradition or your, sect tells you to do. Do those things well and, clean your mouth up and all those great things. But just do that and then just bow and do your prayers to Jesus at night, and that will be your ticket to salvation. Don't you dare try to be him, to walk on water, to do greater things than he, even though he told us to do that. What better way to look at it than don't cling to me, as he tells Mary, but eat my body, as he tells us and before that, right? So
Yeah, I mean,
how do you see that?
one of the problems with the objectification of Jesus is, putting him, presenting him as a kind of placeholder for, some abstract ideal that one may dream up in his head. is that it totally loses the objective truth of Jesus as a person, and it kind of devolves into a kind of moral relativism where you can make Jesus out to be whatever you want him to be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem is, and that's why Christianity often becomes a kind of lukewarm faith, is because people put their own ideas into this placeholder that they call Jesus. They make Jesus out to be a very lukewarm figure, and at the same time they make him out to be a very militaristic figure, a very aggressive
Yeah.
figure, a vengeful god
Yeah.
that was already in existence
Yeah.
prior to his uh, incarnation. So it's
They try to
important to
make him
get
more attractive to human standards of greatness, right? When they try to make him out like that, right?
right, yeah, human standards of greatness. We put in that into the placeholder whatever we have already dreamt up in our heads, whatever myths we use to justify violence towards one another, and we totally we perpetuate the old pagan myths by doing that in a certain degree, uh, because when we refuse to acknowledge the person of Jesus, and treat him like we would treat an actual human person, we revivify the pagan sacred. We do not the pagan stories do not get demystified. They get they get another skin, to use a video game term. They get another costume, just that, another costume. So yeah, I think you're spot on. We need to understand the person of Jesus, and we need to understand, and we need to emulate.
Yeah. And uh, it's um it's something that so many people miss because they're so fixated as being pious from a human standpoint, which is a kind of works orientation to, I want to let we all have it. We all have that temptation that we want to be seen as righteous or good by our peers. It could be the atheist club, and we want to show and signal how much of an atheist, rationalist, skeptic you are, and you want to compete with your atheist buddies at the atheist club about that. It doesn't have to be with Christianity, but within Christianity, that human tendency of mimetically, we want to use that word, competing with your neighbor to show that, I'm signaling that I am righteous and that I am holy and that I am a worm, and oh my goodness, I'm such a scum compared to God, but yet you're doing nothing. You're still in the boat, right? You can say you're a scumbag all day long and how you're a dirty sinner and stay in the boat like the rest of the disciples who were cowardly and not wanting to be Christ and walk on water. I mean, I wouldn't want to walk on water. I'd be terrified too, right? But that kind of existential breaking of the fourth wall that the text is doing there has a very poignant power that we're missing when we try to be a good holy boy, which is important. I mean, I don't want to sound contradictory, but these things are kind of paradoxical. Be holy, be great. Those are tools. Those are methods for taming the desires, which we're going to get into a little bit. But when you make that the end all be all of like kind of what you're supposed to do, I think you miss out on the greater picture that is abundantly clear when you look at Jesus's life as something that you literally can be a part, and you can imitate it, and you can think the way he thinks, and you can use his thinking to do great things, greater than he did, he said, and we don't believe that, and we think, oh, how audacious and arrogant would I be to say my goal is to do greater things than Jesus. But that's being obedient to Jesus. That's the kind of hero that he is, right? He wants to bring you out to be the best that you could be, and not some kind of patronizing way, like talking to a toddler. Hey, wow, you hit the ball so high. Wow. That's not what he's saying. It's so important to say that over and over again, right? Because our version of religion that we get because of our own human constructs for what we think is desirable and powerful make us still believe that when Jesus says, you will do greater things than I, we still believe he's saying it like you say to a toddler who just hit the ball barely off the T-ball stand. And you're saying, oh, wow, you did a great job. Like, we think he's talking to us that way. And I don't think he is. I think if you see him saying, get out of the boat and walk on water, and then Peter's walking on water, when he says, take up the cross, like I take up my cross, when he says heal, when he says cast out spirits, when he says baptize nations, when he says, go and do these things, be me, eat my body, drink my blood. That's the most visceral way to communicate to the human species, founded as it is in its view of the cults and religions that it constructs, in sacred cannibalism, and then all the way through that to ritual sacrifice and animal sacrifice, and now rituals like war and all these other things that continue in the modern world in more deconstructed forms. This is a way of saying to the human species, when I come to earth, which I am here on earth and in heaven and earth coming together, the visible and the invisible, you need to be me. Do not turn me into another idol like every other god you ever made up, which are really just people you killed and devoured, right? So if you want to encapsulate to the human species who they really are and their model of religion, so it's like a humbling, right? Like if I was a creator, I'm trying to imagine what God is trying to communicate here in this text. So in that sense, I'm being theological and anthropological in this way of looking at it. But if I want to understand that, I think it's important to see that he would put in indications like, hey, what are you doing? Get up. Don't worship me like that. Or, hey, don't cling to me. To say, don't idolize me. Don't care more about your statue of me or your club, your denomination that you've made for me. Don't care more about that. Like, I'm going to use the cross as a means to stab my opponents and go to war and holy crusade. That is the kind of culmination of this kind of cling to me model of Jesus that so much of Christianity is still wrestling with, as opposed to eating my body, drinking my blood, and becoming me. Jesus did not wage war in the method in which pagans did, right? So I understand there's room for self-defense, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole today, but and I'm not calling out any particular war in particular in my mind right now, but just this notion of like, we need to use force and coercion to subdue and dominate by force to put our crosses on every city. Like this kind of fantasy that some so-called traditional Christians have is just kind of a sorry ripoff of paganism with Christian veneer taped on top.
Right, and according to Paul, we are called to partake of the energies of God. So partake in the energies of God. What does that mean? That means that we are to in our human image, we are called to reflect the attributes of God. And when we think about the attributes of God, what better example is there but the life of Jesus Christ? And the life of Christ, as shown in the Gospels, are to be the ultimate hermeneutic for the rest of the scriptures. And that is why Paul said, I preach nothing but Christ crucified. And the crucifixion of Christ is the animating event that drives the entire our interpretation of the entire scripture. And the crucifixion is such a monumental event because it is showing us how God deals with evil in the world. God does not deal with evil in the sense that he's going to come back and he's going to smite all his enemies like a human conqueror does, because as Jesus was being arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, in the Gospel of John, he says to Peter, as Peter tries to defend Jesus, he says to Peter, do you not know that I have authority over legions of angels? yet he does not he does not order the legions of angels to wreak havoc on his enemies. Rather, his ultimate his modus operandi, his way of dealing with evil is through the cross, is through self-sacrifice, is
Right.
so that stops the cycle of violence, and that totally fractures the 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 crowd that thirsts for his blood at the foot of the cross. It totally fractures their belief system that the death of one person can be a salvation for many. And we need to, yeah, I think that's the central event of the gospel. Not the King David's conquests, not Solomon's uh, wondrous architectures or the temple, not anything else aside from the crucifixion. That is our primary focus.
Yeah. Um, it's it's interesting. I was just thinking about that. That Jesus comes from that lineage of royalty, right? But he subverts the concepts of royalty and grandeur as his ancestors didn't fully get, right? They're doing, big
Right.
pomp and circumstance and harems, and he's doing none of that. He's doing something different. He's not going totally, he knows, like Jerry Boyer says, he knows how to recline at table like the elites. So he's not doing the whole, revolutionary peasant communist thing, but he's also not doing what you would expect a royal lineage king to do, right? And that reminds me of kind of like his cousin, John the Baptist, who was of royalty too, in some sense. He was of the aristocracy. His family was in the aristocracy. So him being he was a little bit more wild and woolly, right? Compared to Jesus's, kind of personification and his display.
Yeah.
He was wearing more wild. He was a little bit more in the, out there, revolutionary kind of vibe going. I wouldn't say that's exactly John, but that vibe, wearing camel clothes and eating locusts and honey, and kind of going fire and brimstone a little bit. It kind of looked like, who this is aristocratic, high priest son, coming from this, aristocratic position of wealth and power in the community. And look at this guy being, it's not Antifa billionaire son, but there's something, adjacent to that to understand what's going on. John's obviously holy in his message compared to Antifa mistaken violence, right? But the point is,
Well, John,
I'm trying to illustrate kind of how it would feel at the time, right? We just think John the
right.
Baptist is this random, homeless looking guy out of nowhere. No, he comes from like an aristocratic power family in the community, as his was connected with the temple and everything in that higher position.
Well, John is a kind of throwback to the Old Testament
Yeah,
prophets who often accompanied the kings, right? So with King David, for example,
yeah,
you had Nathan, right? And with Saul, you had Samuel. And in the Old Testament stories, you would often see the prophets admonishing the kings, rebuking the kings for not doing the will of God. But here, John the Baptist says he must become greater and I must become less, right? So this is like a
passing of
kind
the
of
torch from the
subversion.
different eras,
Passing,
right? Yeah,
yes, a passing of the torch from the different eras. And it's also showing Jesus here is, like you mentioned, he's the true human being. He embodies the rich and the poor and the prophets all at the same time. He is a complete human being. And it's so wonderful how he brings it all together. He brings it's brings all of the various personalities of the Bible, and redeems every aspect of those personalities and makes magnifies the image of God in human beings.
yeah. So that's important, because that magnification is something that folks who tend to be traditional or conservative minded within church tradition, they tend to shy away from that, right? The
Right.
magnification um, of the human person and what it's capable of doing in its union with the Holy Spirit through, through God, and the Son, all working in this kind of harmonious dance that we're invited to be a part of, to be alive in that way. John chapter 5, verse 39 says, "You search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, and these are they which testify of me, but you're not willing to come to me, that you may know, that you may have life." In other words, you're not willing to imitate me. You're not willing to be me. You looking through the scriptures, trying to create this objectification model of God that you can attain for purity's sake, to be in the in group, not the out group, and yet you're not willing to be me. You're not willing to trust that what I'm displaying for you is really what God's about. You don't trust that God's nonviolent. You don't trust that God is not judging you because you have an illness, that means you're wicked and he hates you. You can't trust me when I heal someone on the Sabbath. You can't trust that, right? You can't trust in that reality. You can't be with that. You can't become with that. You have to, to this day, put caution tape around Christ and his holiness, and then create, to this day, I don't care what tradition, you have hierarchies in all the different churches fighting over the most petty, dumb, worldly things. I don't like the way you do this. I don't like the way you do that. We don't like this chant. We don't like this song. We don't like this hymn. And they're fighting over, or I don't like this ethnic group having this power in this church, and that ethnic group doesn't like that group, and they don't like that style of thing, and that doesn't like that style of thing. That's in everything. If you go to Protestant churches, you have black churches across the town that are got the same Bible as the white church, and they can't figure out how, these churches can't figure out how to be communion together. And the same thing for churches around the world, different ethnic tribalism popping up. And, we don't break bread with that person, and we're in schism with that person because of this war, and all this stuff is because of this stuff that he's talking about right here. You search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life. And another way to add to that understanding of what he's getting at is you search your traditions. And in them you think you have eternal life. And these are which testify to me, in meaning the scriptures pointing to him. The traditions that you hold dear in your church are pointing to Jesus. They're not Jesus. They're not God. They're not the object of your search for life. They're a tool to help you be Christ, to become him, to not say you worship God on Sunday and vote for war and mass incarceration, which includes assault on people of nonviolent, victimless behaviors. You're putting them in an assault cages and laughing, saying, "Don't drop the soap," and you think you're a Christian? How can you say that? How can you say that? How can you say that? Oh, they sold a drug? Jesus freed a woman who was accused of adultery. Is adultery not a worse contamination in terms of creating disorder and destruction in society than any drug ever invented? I would say it's a worse danger. And yet Jesus freed her and didn't say, well, go put her in a dungeon for 10 years till she learns her lesson not to do that anymore. He said, go and sin no more, and you're not condemned. Go. You're good. You're free. You're free, right? You're free. The truth will set you free. And the truth is that the scapegoat mechanism is still alive and not well, but it's alive in the prison industrial complex in America, the war industrial complex in America, the regulatory industrial complex in America, and everywhere else adjacent, has the same problem.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus also forgave the criminal as he was dying on the cross. So there you have God's attitude towards those.
And the irony is he's not just a criminal. It says transgressors, right? He's numbered among the transgressors, the prophets, right? But if you look at it, it's bandits, the word for bandit, which was a term that translates accurately to revolutionary. So just like Barabbas, who was freed, he was a revolutionary, like Mr. William Wallace, so to speak, that kind of a figure. Those guys that Jesus was crucified with were revolutionary resistors. They were zealots. And so he was numbered among the zealots, even though he was killed by a lot of, in some cases, zealots being dissatisfied with his model of love and forgiveness and nonviolence. So the irony is so interesting, right? Think about that for a moment. Think of the poetic level there of the cross, right? He's killed by zealots for not being a zealot, and he's killed in the same way as a bunch of zealots. So he's thrown into the same lot. So you want to talk about taking on the sin? There's the taking on of the sin of the whole world on that level, right? We're always zealous for our tribe. We're always zealous for our nation, our empire, our club, our way of life, right? Our clique, whatever. We're zealous. Our group is the best. We win. We get the power. We're holy. We're righteous. We're better than you. At the end of the day, that zealot spirit is what ultimately sent Jesus to his death, because the crowd turned on him when they realized they were whipped up by, the religious authorities, and they turned on him because of his message of nonviolence, forgiveness, loving both your elitists in your community as well as the poor, loving even those who persecute you in the Roman Empire. That whole message was a record scratch on the party of what they wanted from zealot leaders, right? So think of it this way, being numbered among the transgressors, being numbered among the violent revolutionaries, Jesus dies. So he dies the death that all are going to die when they live by the sword and die by the sword. He lived without the sword, but because we refused to live with him without the sword, he died by the sword so that we could not die by the sword down the road. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that beautiful for a second? Let's just think about that. He is accused. He's numbered among the transgressors. What's the transgression? The tit-for-tat cycle of violence, the tit-for-tat revolutionary spirit to get revenge on the establishment, to overthrow the empire, whatever it is that's motivating our zealot spirit to this day. He was given the same death of those guys, even though he did not take up a sword. And so think about that when we think about he died for our sin. Our sin continues to this day because we don't want to be him. We're afraid it'll take us to the cross. And so we cling to an objectification of Jesus that we put in our pocket and then use to go and subdue our enemies through politics or power dynamics or manipulations, whatever. At the end of the day, he took on that sin for us. And he was numbered as we are. He bore the public display of what that leads to so that we would have a pathway out of that cycle of violence. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, it reminds me of that fight scene from the movie Rocky, where Rocky invites Apollo Creed to, hit him as hard as he can. And Apollo, just hits him and hits him and hits him, and Rocky just takes it. By the end of the fight, Apollo says, he shakes his head, he says, you're crazy, there's no way. So he says, it's like it's proving that there's no way you can beat a man who can take it all. And Jesus here is taking it all. He's taking it all. So by the end of the passion narrative, everybody has lost their energy. They're exhausted, and they're like, they don't have any more energy left over to to perpetuate that tit for tat revolutionary violence anymore. It's like it's over. He's absorbed all of this negative, this hateful dark energy of humanity, and he's absorbed it in his body, and he just burns it up in the crucifixion. And that's basically what Jesus does on the cross. He doesn't reflect that negative energy. He doesn't throw back that same negative energy on us, like like a tennis match,
Like,
where we are
go get revenge on my behalf. It doesn't say
go and get right.
So but the church didn't hear that, because everywhere you know what I mean, like that's one of the biggest problems, right? Is that it's it is the biggest stumbling block for the church's witness, because that's not witnessing Jesus. If people come to your church and it's supposed to be a house of prayer, as Jesus said, this is my Father's house. It's supposed to be a house of prayer and peace, not supposed to be a place to justify one's holiness in relationship to the world. It's meant to be a place to become like Christ so that the world might be saved through his body on earth as it is in heaven, so to speak, right? Like this kind of coming together of the unseen perfection that he represents in the seen, frailty and imperfection of the world, but yet it gets more and more perfected. It becomes, in other words, this idea of theosis that people talk about, becoming one with God. I don't think it's just that individuals are to become one with God, but I think that we are to play a role in helping the planet Earth become one with God, to become one with heaven, right? And so have Earth as a planet, as a sphere, and then also Earth as in humanity is to become one with God, not just our individual, personal sin issues. That's almost like missing the forest for the trees when you orient your whole life around that. Although it's a lifetime process to deal with, your personal frailties and frailties and failures and sins. That's not the main agenda of what you're called to be, I think. So you're called to go out.
Yeah.
Go out. That's why the New Testament is so filled with fishery and being out in the sea, as opposed to the Old Testament, which is a lot of imagery of besides Jonah, which is interesting because Jesus says the sign of Jonah is the sign that I bring, right? And sign of Jonah,
right.
Jonah is going out to the sea. He's going out to the world to bring the message to the whole world. Versus much of the Old Testament is about people in land with herds of animals, whereas the New Testament, it's all, especially the Gospels, it's out in the Sea of Galilee, fishing, catching fish, which is a symbol of the broader world. That's our calling, is to go out in the world. The action is not going to be on the land representing the starting point for Jesus's people. And then the sea representing going out to the unknown to go tame the world. Not the sea represents not just the world, it also represents the chaos of the unknown and the chaos of evil, right? That we're to tame evil in history, in time, in space, as his body on earth. I know you don't think we can do that. I get so many Christians, of every tribe and tongue, who think that everything's in a stationary thing, like we're not doing anything good because, they can always point to all the evils of our time and say, well, that's a sign that, we're not actually like winning in history, that Jesus isn't subduing the earth in the name of peace and love and shalom, right? But that's not the case. If we've looked at this enough with anthropology lenses to see that we have that Christ's kingdom is coming and is breaking through more than 10,000 years ago or 6,000 or 7. You can see a through line. It's not perfect. There's stumblings and fits and starts and all that, but there is something happening in history that we're a part of. And I think the better we get past this objectification view of Jesus, and the sooner we get past it, and the more we become part of the consuming of his body, then we'll get better on board with this project that he has in mind for us. Clinging is a needy objectification. Okay. It means you don't want to get out of the boat. You want to wallow in your sinfulness and say, I'm unworthy. But when someone says, hey, will you speak up on behalf of a group of people being killed in a war that's supposed to be popular with your people? You say, I don't think so. I'll just work on my personal sins and lash. You know what I mean? You get what I mean? That's what it means to have a needy objectification of Jesus, right? Well, I'm just going to take my communion and I'm going to work on being a nicer person and not cussing or not, I'm going to work. And those are all good things. When I say this, I'm qualifying myself a lot because I want to be gracious to everybody. If that's a problem for you that you're convicted, that's fine. If you're convicted about, being greedy or being a workaholic or being lazy, and not getting off the couch and getting your career going, and you think that following Christ helps you get there, that's great. All those are great. But if you do all that and you truncate Christ as a psychological tool, as we talked about archetype stuff, without realizing, no, it's not just an archetype. Christ is different from all myths. He breaks through the lie of the violence that's hidden in myth, including the satanic lie at the heart of all of it, that it's better that one man die than the whole nation perish. He breaks through all of that. He frees us from that myth. He frees us from the hive mind. He allows us to have personal agency in a way that is consistent with who God, the creator of the universe, is. Clinging is a needy objectification. I'm going to my church. I'm so sinful. Oh, I'm so sinful. Oh, I'm so white privileged, if that's your sin matrix that you're going to use. You go to progressive churches. Oh, I'm so whatever. But that's why I vote for Hillary Clinton to bomb everybody around the world. That's why I vote for X, Y, and Z to sanction and starve kids. Oh, they should have left. They should have left the area. Oh, I'm so holy. But I do nothing to help a man, cure cancer because, that's the experts do that. The experts do that? You saw the experts with the war on cancer since the 1960s. They haven't cured it. It cost $1 million for their cures that don't really do that well. It ruins your body. That's not a gospel curing of cancer. Gospel curing of cancer means it's done and everybody can afford it. You don't need to have insurance to afford it. Sorry. Try your science harder. Right? So the point is like, don't tell me that you're following Christ holiness because you're like in some state of perfect piety. Oh, I'm such a sin. Someone, elbows you and you say, oh, I'm such a sinner. Thank you for elbowing me. You reminded me of how God thinks of me. Oh, but he loves me anyways. If you have that mindset, and then you go into a little box and you vote for Mr. Caesar to save you, who do you trust in? Who do you trust in? Who do you really trust in? Who do you trust in to be your king of the world, not just the king of your psychic spirit life? That's why heaven, earth coming together. You can't sit there and say, it's all in the mind. If it's in the mind, into my personal little sin life, that's just heaven. There is no earthly good to that. Being so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. That's what it looks like. We're not that faith. Christianity is about heaven and earth coming together. So you don't get to go and say, oh, let the experts at the FDA and Pfizer solve cancer. And I'm so holy because I'm a worm. I'm a worm. I have fasted for 500 days. But I will trust in President X, Y, and Z to solve the economy. Oh, what? 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 What about do not put your faith in princes, right? What about get out of the boat and walk on water? Do you think it's walking on water for the person who's going to figure out how to cure cancer? Maybe it's already happened. Everybody always says it, but they always create that conspiracy mindset. Oh, well, they'll never let us have it. Well, screw that mindset. That's not going to solve the problem. People are dying of leprosy, so to speak. Are you going to sit there and just compartmentalize that? Oh, there's healers in my church that have this the gift of healing. They'll take care of it. No, how about you? Go and tell people the truth, that it's a metabolic disease, not primarily a genetic-driven disease. Science is catching up to that realization. It's so important for us to understand to be Christ is to consume. That, what does that do? It's an honest action that reminds one of their cannibalistic sin nature, as well as a humble recognition that we must be him and make him the subject of our life.
Well, it's very important what you mentioned, what you described so brilliantly there is that Jesus not only came to set us free from sin, he came so that we are set free from the bondage of necessity, right? Free. So what does the walking of water symbolize there? You already mentioned that the water symbolizes the chaotic part of the world. It symbolizes the, in modern terms, the wild, wild west, right? That's the water. And when Jesus walks on water and invites Peter to join him to walk on water, we are called to tame nature. We are called to dominate nature and to, but like you mentioned, curing cancer. That's making nature subject to humanity. Jesus did not come to so that nature dominates us. He came so that we dominate nature.
Amen. So go ahead.
Oh, I mean, that's the thing, like we Christians are often, like what you mentioned, like falling on the back on the words of princes, who are we have a tendency to fall back on the fallenness of the world.
Yeah.
We are not here to
That's not believing in Jesus, though. That's the point.
Yeah.
You're not believing in Jesus. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
You're not believing in Jesus. Jesus came to save the world. And you're like, well, but he's not going to do it because we're just so sinful. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? We're just too sinful. We just can't do it. I'm just going to fast for 7,000 days. That's called stupid. I'm sorry. It's dumb. Fasting is a tool to help get your head straight, not the end all be all. Okay? Look, I'm not an expert on fasting, as you can see, but, this is not something that is.
Well, it's like
we're not picking on fasting. I'm just using it as a metaphor. It could be anything, whatever your gimmick is. If you're Pentecostal and you like to do all that, then that's your thing, right? That's your thing. You want to that's what you're going to rely on. That's not to take away. If that helps you, I understand. I understand there's miraculous healings. I understand that, but if that's your thing. And yet you're voting for Mitt Romney? I'm sorry. We're tired of that. It's over. That satanic system is done. And Trump's not going to be your hero either. I don't care what you think. Let's be real about these things, but I don't want to go there. The point is not, they're all equally bad. I get it. I get that that's not true. But what I'm saying is we have something that we're supposed to be a part of. And we got billions of people who think they're a part of something, but they're missing the entire boat. They're still in the boat. Like you said, and you know what, sir, you made a great point. That's a great point, that we are to tame nature, right? So when we create modern things like seed oil, sludge, and we create things like whatever else causes the driving these, because cancer wasn't as ubiquitous in the past. We all know that. So it's the things that we've done to our environment. Whether it's the artificial light, the disruption of our sleep patterns, Wi-Fi, whatever it is, EMF, maybe that's 1% of it, who knows? But the whole package, I think it's mostly seed oils that have driven the rates of cancer. They had cancer in the Founding Fathers' Day, and they weren't eating seed oil. So I understand cancer's always been an indie artist of disease, but it was never a pop Billboard top 100 top 5 artists like it is today for killing people, right? So whatever the heck we did, that was a failed attempt at subduing nature because it was driven by hubris, by scientific Gnosticism, which we can't get into in depth today, but that's what's going scientific Gnosticism. That's not incarnate. It's not embodied. It's not loving our neighbor. It's just scientific knowledge puffery gone wild with patents and all this nonsense. It's arrogance. And that is what allowed this part of our nature, which is cell division and how it works, to go awry. So what do you do as a Christian if you believe in Jesus, that we are to walk on water and tame nature? That means taming the cellular division that's gone awry because of cancer. That's what you're called to do as a Christian. There's nothing that is more alive in Christ than to be a part of that in the name of Jesus. Taming nature's gone awry because of humans' arrogance. Christians come along and they solve the problem. And they make us healthier in the process. And that's just one disease, but there's a whole host of it. Why do you think Jesus spent his entire time using diseases as his imagery toolbox for what he wanted you to do? Now, we take that and say it was purely imagery, and most of it was just a metaphor for our internal sin, so that's why I'm going to be a good old Christian boy and fast for 10,000 days and do all the right, speaking in tongues and do all the right baptism rituals or whatever it is that makes you feel like you're Christian more than others and your worminess, we know. But all of that is like filthy rags if you don't have the Spirit of God motivating your actions to truly trust and believe that Jesus is saving the world and that you're a part of it. And that includes, like you said, Surit, the chaos of nature, because it is chaotic to have cells dividing out of control. And it's chaotic to have Alzheimer's, for God's sake. People should be able to remember everything they have and who they are when they're 99 and 110. Death itself is an enemy, and it's the last enemy we'll defeat before Christ returns. because he's made his enemies a footstool. We don't even believe that to this day. We think it's all, oh, he makes an enemy a footstool when he helps me stop cussing so much when I'm in traffic. That's not what it's all about. That's part of a little tiny part of it. There's something more to it than that, right? That we're a part of it. That means literally death will be defeated by Christ through his actions on earth, and we're the sorriest team in the universe, human, the human church or whatever, sorriest team to execute those actions on the field as he's the head and we're executing his work. But we are to do it nonetheless. That's supposed to be our animating spirit every single day.
Well, the reason it's a good thing you mentioned death, because there are so many Christians out there who pretend to not believe in evolution and who pretend to believe in creationism. But the way they act is they couldn't be any more better proponents of evolution, because they treat death as a precursor to our salvation. Yeah. God engineered into our minds that we should be appalled at death. We should be shocked at death, not because death is natural, but because death is something that is very much unnatural.
Yeah.
And the reason he put that into us is so that we can fight against it, so that we can cure cancer, we can cure all of these things that threaten death. And when we work against death, that is in a way also, I think, fighting against nature, taming nature. Not fight against nature in a way to destroy it, but to control it, as God controls the universe.
We don't want to fight nature, because that tends to be the driving force of so much of Gnostic scientism, right? Which is like,
the atom bomb.
Our ancestors ate butter for fat. We will create a scientific fat of the future. We will take seeds that used to be industrial sludge. We will turn them into an oil. We will put it in our bodies because we are better. That's fighting against nature, right? Where it's like, right, I must do better than the creator. That's not what the scientific Christian spirit is. Scientific Christian spirit, it doesn't mean, going back to Eden. It doesn't mean, building a Tower of Babel. Both of those are wrong. It means kind of using and dancing with nature, and then adding our creative,
right,
values, our creative value or add-ons to nature, to work with nature so that we can achieve service to our fellow human beings without violence.
Well, I like to think that, when the farm metaphor, when you think of the farmer as the human being, and the shepherd dog as nature, and the sheep as the fruits of nature, or other human beings. The shepherd, we are there to, we don't fight or beat the dog who shepherds the lamb. That dog is our friend, and we dance with the dog so that the sheep are placed appropriately on the land.
And the atom bomb is a disrespectful use of the dog, right? Right. So we take atoms and we abuse them to blow up lots of humans. And we say that we're Christians. We go to church on Sunday and we do a long, long fast while we drop a bomb on tens of thousands of Christians in Nagasaki. Whoa. I mean, it doesn't matter. Human life. Let's not be tribal about it, but just to add to the irony here. Okay. That this is the biggest, Nagasaki was the largest concentration of Christians, and that's what so-called Christian America thought was righteous and good, to kill Japanese Christian civilians in the largest concentration of Christians. It's funny how that works. But you see, it's sad how it works, because we disrespect nature when we use our scientific ingenuity for the purposes of violence and murder and destruction. That's a pagan way of doing technology. That's why I say that true innovation didn't come about until Christianity, Christ coming into earth saying, do ingenuity, do scientific method, do find cures for all the diseases, do create better forms of transportation, all in the service of your fellow man through love, not through, I will tame nature in a violent way and then use it to be more efficient at killing and subduing my opponents. That's pagan. That's what drove all innovation prior to Christ. Most of it, people say, oh, well, they had like plows to They invented a plow. Well, yeah, what does a plow also come from? A sword, stabbing people. So yeah, you can also, after you stab someone, say, oh, we can actually use this to hit the grain too. But you don't need to eat grain if you understand Jesus, right? I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious there, but the point remains, right? That when you understand, what Christ is calling us to do, is to work with nature. That's not what solar panels do, by the way. I'm sorry, solar panels have their place, but that's a technology that then gets distorted and mutated to say, well, we require billions and billions of your money to steal with our government to subsidize making solar panels somewhat affordable to the average person. Well, that's not efficient. And it uses theft to make it like propped up. So therefore, that's a shortcut to heaven that leads to hell because you're creating tyranny in the process. And the truth, in the gospel sense, sets us free. It sets us free from the hive mind. That's why in that same passage, when Jesus frees the woman accused of adultery, in John 8, it starts off with that story. Later on, you get the famous passage that it says here, that the truth will set you free. He says, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth, when Jesus revealed the truth of the violence of those people in that crowd wanting to murder that woman, when he revealed that truth, the truth of who they were, that they had personal agency and that they weren't going to be able to hide in the shadow of the crowd, when he revealed the truth of her sin, that she was chasing desires that were illusions, that were not going to give her what she wanted out of that. When the truth, it set her free from the bondage of the desires that were driving her to that situation, and it set the crowd free from the desire to be better than her, to use her as a scapegoat, to use her as a whipping post to cast their sins onto that they themselves needed to deal with. And it freed them from being locked in the spellbound hive mind of the crowd. And that is a model of what we are to be, right? Freed from tyranny with the truth of the gospel, penetrating mythology that justifies wars and incarcerating our neighbors for nonviolent, victimless choices in dungeons where they're raped. All of that can be free. We can be free from that nonsense. We can be free from the lie of fake green energy. We can be free from the lie of false cures for diseases. We can be free from the lie of false healthy foods that make us sicker. We can be free from all of that when we eat his body, drink his blood, and become him rather than clinging to him and then missing the entire point.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, Surit, I appreciate your time. I think we're going to wrap it up here. We've got more, but we're not going to be able to get to it. I think this is a great way to end it here, and we can unpack this concept because there's more that we could add to this at a later date. So we'll stop here, and I appreciate your time as always, our audience as well. Any last thoughts, sir?
Oh, I think this was a fun discussion, and I'd be happy to do this again with you. So Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. And again, check out Surit's articles on aneighborschoice.com. And if you want to be in touch with us, email us hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.